Hey, my friends, I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, and this is part two of one of those two-parters where we just get to going on a big idea, and we want to give it an honest look, so we just hit pause in the middle and divide it into 2 days. So if you didn't listen to yesterday, you should listen to yesterday, and we're going to finish unpacking what we can know about this question of God and miracles and what part God plays and what part people play and how it relates to this passage we're looking at in Matthew chapter 17. We'll play a little music, and we'll pick it up from there. So you got these varying positions before we even have the conversation about the viability of miracles in general. So wherever you are on that list, I think we can't help but come back to this text and acknowledge fairly that there are at least two places in the book of Matthew where it looks as though miraculous stuff isn't happening because people don't believe it enough. That's Matthew chapter 13:58, and he did not do many miracles there because of their lack of faith. Or you could interpret the verses we just looked at in Matthew chapter 17 the same way. We've already done a podcast where we broke down chapter 13, verse 58. So focusing on this one, let's just look at what the actual promise is. You can say to this mountain, move from here, and there it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. Now, on the one hand, I suppose if reality lined up with it, the most natural reading of this text would be that if you believe in God enough and believe enough that God will do it, you could tell gigantic chunks of rocks to move from one place to another, then exert no physical pressure on those, and supernaturally that thing would move. But man, got 2,000 years of history and no accounting of anything like that ever happening, which to me says that if the way the text is to be read is such that, well, if you believe enough, this will happen, then nobody's ever believed enough. So it seems to me a very unnatural read in light of what we know about the world and the claims of Christian history to try to inflict on this text some kind of universal physical gifting of ability like what we get at the beginning of chapter 10 in the missional discourse, which is the big open world quest where the disciples are first imbued with the powers of God to do miraculous things. I mean, there he specifically says, heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those who have leprosy, drive out demons. So it looks like there's a definite imparting. But here, I'm not saying the all-powerful God, creator of all of existence, sustainer and knower of all things, and unlimited God couldn't move mountains if he wanted to, but kind of why? I guess I don't get what that would do or accomplish, per se. And even if you look at a couple of those fringe examples that people throw out and be like, well, this one time this one person prayed and then a volcano erupted and some lava came down, and in a way that is a mountain moving. Or there's one time some people really believed that God would do something and then there was an earthquake. And then, I mean, look at that. Earthquakes are kind of like the ground moving and stuff. Yeah, I mean, maybe, but it seems like the miracles in the Bible are not nearly so thin to have to stitch together and so coincidental. It seems like there's a very clear connection between 1 and 1, which then equals 2. No, it looks like here we're getting something that's a bit more metaphorical. The idea that nothing will be impossible for you surely still has to be contained within the framework of the will of God or what makes sense for what God wants to accomplish. And by drawing on that imagery of the mustard seed again in this passage, it feels to me like what Jesus is saying is that this tiny little thing that seems like it doesn't have enough momentum to go anywhere or change anything, that is this kernel, this seed of the values of the kingdom, of this promised kingdom, it actually is and it actually can. And if God has power enough to move a mountain, which I think all of us would say the Bible is holding him out as having enough power to do should he want to, then how much more so can he make this kingdom thing happen, which happens overwhelmingly invisibly in the hearts of people? There is kind of an interesting detail in the text that I don't think I remembered to point out that I think relates to this, and that is that notice the dad thinks his kid has seizures. Jesus sees a spiritual problem behind that. Did the dad know that the kid even had demons? Did the dad know what the nature of the miracle was that liberated his kid? Or was his dad like, my kid is epileptic and now he's no longer epileptic? It's not red letters where Matthew tells us that Jesus rebuked the demon and it came out of the boy and he was healed from that moment. So I don't know if Jesus let the dad in on this thing or not, but a lot of different bystanders could have looked at that particular type of miracle and come away with some different conclusions in terms of what Jesus was actually up against there and what he was doing. Was this a miracle that demonstrated Jesus' authority over the spiritual world, Jesus' authority over the physical world, the human body? Or maybe some more skeptical types were like, yeah, your kid got better around the same time that you went and talked to Jesus, but there's no necessary correlation between those two things. Maybe there were skeptics who saw the whole thing go down and never did come around to even thinking something miraculous had happened here. The point is, there are different classes of miracles when we deal with a question like this. Some of them are just so smoking gun obvious because of where you were sitting or what it would look like if such a miracle were to occur, whereas others leave a little bit of room open for interpretation and a little more room for the person to look at it skeptically and say, I don't know. Now, Jesus, to whom it is given to judge all the nations, he clearly believes that he's done enough and that people have had enough opportunity to see his miraculous work to confirm that he's the Son of God and he's the Christ and the Messiah, as Peter had pointed out. But there were naturalists who believed that nothing miraculous ever happened in all of earth before the time of Jesus. There were naturalists who looked at the stuff Jesus did and came away still believing that nothing supernatural has ever happened in the history of the world. And there are naturalists since who read accounts like this and still hold to that naturalist position. All of this to say that when we try to think through how miracles work and what role God plays and what role people play and how to read the biblical narrative on miraculous claims, we have to acknowledge that the very passage that pointed us in that direction leaves room for two different reads on even what the nature of this miracle was. What it doesn't leave room for is wondering whether the boy got better or not, according to the text he did, and whether Jesus deserves credit or not, according to the text he does. So you're probably not going to find this answer very satisfying, but here's what I'm coming back to. I don't think this passage answers our question. So given what we have in front of us in terms of what we worked through in the book of Matthew so far, I think we still have to go with the answer is inconclusive on this point. We have a handful of passages that make it look like now God just does whatever God is going to do because he's God, and then he does the things he's going to do. And then we have other passages that indicate somehow God is making a point by rewarding this person's faith, and that somehow God is maybe making a point by not doing something miraculous because of someone's lack of faith. But at the absolute simplest level, I think what I can say for sure in regards to our big question here is this. Nothing a human can do can logically put limitations on God. So any text that we read where we're like, oh, so a human stopped God from doing a thing, we're not reading in the largest possible context of the Bible. The largest possible context of the Bible and reason hold God out, and indeed the definition of God, the God, is the greatest being, greater than any being that can be imagined. Such a being is not the greatest being that can be imagined. Such a being is not the being described in the book of Job, in the book of Isaiah, if that being is in any way subject to the whims or preferences or behavior of people. And that's a tricky thing with a lot of implications. And as much as imagining that God might be subject to people when it comes to certain miraculous things or acts of faith or miracles, in that attempt to humanize God, the whole proposition implodes upon itself. That was a lot of words to just simply say God can't be God and still be subject to or limited by the whims of people. That equation rationally doesn't work. Is it possible that somehow God works with human volition and human faith to teach lessons and allows us to have the impression that somehow we did have a say in how things were unfolding and what he chose to do in terms of breaking the laws of time and space or not? Sure. All I'm saying is any read on this or any other text that suggests that human will is more powerful than God, or that human faith levels somehow limit or inhibit God, I think is incompatible with the rest of the Bible. So does God need a certain degree of faith from people in order to do miracles? No, I don't think so. I don't read the text that way. Might God withhold his miraculous work in certain situations because of where somebody's head is at? Well, yeah, I don't think that's theologically shocking or risky to say. And such a proposition would do nothing to alter or limit or reframe the powers of God. So in answer to our big question we've been poking at for the better part of a week, I suppose that's how I would frame it up. I think there are multiple ways to read it, but I think the jury is still out. And I think what we should do is put a pin in this part of the conversation and keep our antenna out for it as we move forward and see if we can gather more data to think it through and come to a more concrete conclusion. And that right there is part of the fun of taking the slow route on something like this. We have a whole lot of time to think about a whole lot of Bible to holistically try to figure out what we believe on some of these secondary questions. We're going to hit pause there. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.